Abandoned houses in Japan. Free houses in Japan. They're just giving them away. Akiya. There's a trend to buy vacant houses in Japan. But what exactly are they? Over the last few years, there has been this massive upward trend of buying these cheap vacant properties in Japan, and it's only getting crazier. The amount of emails and questions I get about buying a cheap house in Japan is intense. One thing that I really learned through all of these good questions and comments is that there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what is an Akiya. Why are there so many of them? Why are they so cheap? Is it difficult to buy an Akiya? Can you get them for free? How is it different to purchasing a regular house? Is it a good investment? There are a bunch of different questions that need good answers, and that's what this video is all about. I'm going to fill in some of the information gaps and give you a bigger picture of what is an Akiya and what are they all about. So if you've ever been curious about Japan's abandoned properties, stick around on this video and find out more. Let's get started.
Happy travels!
A quick announcement before I get started. I'm excited to say I've just released my own personal map on Rexby with all of the great locations that I've found over the last 15 plus years of traveling all 47 prefectures in Japan. It's a growing map. I'm starting with Niigata and Nagano and expanding it from there. I'll put the details in the description below. You can also support me by buying a coffee. I really appreciate those who have been buying me coffee recently. I'm making the most of it and drinking a lot of coffee. Thank you so much and enjoy the video. Akiya means vacant house in Japanese. It's no longer actively used. People are not maintaining them, people are not taking care of them, and people are not living there. These houses range from completely abandoned structures to houses that are just no longer lived in. Nobody is using them, nobody is maintaining them, and maybe nobody is inheriting them. These are all case by case. But does that mean that people don't own these properties? In most cases, somebody does own the property and they know of its existence. Thanks to the media hype and using the term abandoned houses, there's a misconception that people don't own these properties, but in fact, they do. Why are there Akiya that are so cheap? This one should be pretty obvious. The amount of work that would be required on some of these properties can be extremely high. They might have to replace all of the electrical wiring, all of the plumbing, the roof might have caved in, there could be a crazy termite problem, there can be any problems on these very cheap homes. They might be in the middle of nowhere, there can be a lot of different conditions with the physical state of the property that you need to take into consideration. Why are there so many Akiya in Japan? There are a bunch of different reasons. There is a declining population in Japan. There's a number of houses and a number of people, and that number of people is going down, so there's less need for that house. There is a cultural trend to move away from some of these smaller towns and villages and move to the bigger cities, leaving some of these properties empty. Another factor is the economic downturn in Japan. In the 1970s and 80s, a lot of properties were built as a way to make money. It was an investment opportunity. But since that time, the economy has had a downward trend, and these houses and facilities and other things in the country that have been built are no longer used. Think of ski resorts as a good example. There was once over 900 ski resorts in Japan, and now they're down to about 700. Every year, they're losing about 5 on average. Another factor is that these properties require a lot of maintenance work. These older houses were not built that great. They require a lot of upgrades. For example, the house behind me, it doesn't have any insulation. It requires most likely an upgrade in electricity and plumbing. Standards have changed. This costs money. The preference locally would to be buy something that's ready to go, that you wouldn't have to take apart and put back together. It will cost more. Obviously, land value is different. We're talking about the cost of construction.
So, what is the criteria for Akiya? While the term technically means vacant house, there's more nuance to it, and the criteria can vary. Vacancy or imminent vacancy. Property is usually classified as Akiya when it becomes vacant or when it will soon become vacant. People can actually still live in Akiya right up until they leave. Then they can register their property as an Akiya because it's vacant and they no longer live there. There are ownership intention changes. Often a house becomes an Akiya when the owner intends to sell the property or no longer actively use uses it, which can even apply if the owner still resides in the house waiting for a buyer. It's just that they intend for the property to become vacant. Neglect and maintenance. Lack of upkeep isn't a strict criteria for Akiya, but it is common. Some owners live in a property and for years do not maintain the house. This neglect often contributes to Akiya classification, since it will likely need repairs after the sale. But not all Akiya are cheap. Some are actually quite expensive, and this can be for different reasons. An Akiya doesn't have to be a 100-year-old house. It can be built last year. It can be built this year. It can be a brand new home that is currently vacant, and the value can be as high as you can think it can be. Some Akiya are cheap. Some Akiya are expensive. It depends on a lot of factors, just like any other country. The location, the market demand, the condition of the property, all of these things that tend to hold a higher value in property. It might have historical or architectural value. Some are professionally restored by local Japanese people or Westerners too, and this justifies a higher price. The land value can also increase based on popularity in desired locations. Akiya doesn't always mean it's going to be a cheap property. It just means that it's not actively used or is in transition to not be used. And factors like location, historical significance, completed renovations, and other factors can make Akiya property values higher and even quite valuable. We talked about the classification of Akiya, but let's talk about Akiya Banks. An Akiya Bank is an online platform operated by local municipalities in Japan to list and promote these vacant properties and to sell them to prospective buyers. These platforms are part of Japan's efforts to address the growing number of vacant homes, especially in rural areas, with the aim to revitalize the regions with population decline. Through Akiya Banks, owners can showcase their properties, often with incentives like lower prices and subsidies, making it easier for people interested in purchasing affordable property in Japan. How did Akiya Banks start? Akiya Banks were introduced as a response to several key challenges in Japan: the population decline in rural areas, aging population and inheritance complexities, efforts to revitalize local economies, and streamlining the process to buy these vacant homes. In essence, Akiya Banks serve as an accessible bridge between owners of vacant homes and individuals interested in buying affordable real estate.
When I talk about revitalizing a town or a community in Japan, what does that actually mean? Well, when people finish high school, it's very common for them to move to somewhere like Tokyo in search of a further education and a job, which leaves these towns with less population. A good example is right behind me, this school here that is no longer used. We have a great facility that has no children, no students here to use this space. So it's not just about the houses that are being abandoned or left behind or vacant, it's also the facilities in these towns. And what the government is trying to entice is for people to buy these properties to once again populate and use these facilities. This is a big reason why the Akiya Bank was created and why there are so many subsidies available on these vacant houses. It's an incentive for people to come back and boost the economy of these small towns and villages. The ultimate goal is to have people here and to be part of this community. The space should provide jobs year-round for the residents of the town. Now we reach an interesting discussion point. Is it a good idea for international people to buy a house in Japan? If they're only here for up to 12 weeks of the year, are they contributing enough to the local economy? Is it going to affect having a new school, a new hospital? Will it be enough? Or should it be sold to somebody only locally who is planning to be here year-round and contribute to being part of this community? On one hand, money will be spent here for a period of time by internationals. On the other hand, these properties could be empty permanently. What are your thoughts about this topic? Drop them in the comments.
Let's do a side-by-side comparison of a regular house versus an Akiya house. The condition of the property. An Akiya will generally be poorly maintained and require money to be spent for that to be upgraded in some ways. Where a regular house is generally well maintained, people have lived there and taken care of that with less repairs, and it's move-in ready. The price is often much cheaper as an Akiya, especially in rural areas, and part of this will be access. The prices of a regular house is generally higher. It's in better condition and it's probably in a better location. And talking about location, it might not be a good location for people to commute to a working place. But this isn't always the case. Speaking on location, you can still find them anywhere. It can be even in a convenient location. The ownership process. For an Akiya, it may require unique considerations to move the house into your name. There can be inheritance complexities, and there can be certain conditions on certain areas. The owner can choose certain conditions, and the government can choose certain conditions. For example, if the local government is trying to revitalize their community and their town, you have to live there full time could be one of the conditions. The ownership process. For an Akiya, it may involve unique considerations. It's not always straightforward. There could be certain conditions placed on the property and purchasing the property by the owner or the government. For example, if the government wants to revitalize the community and have people living there, they're not going to want people to buy the house and live there for 1 month a year, or to visit for 1 month a year. One of the conditions would be that you're registering that you're living there and you're planning to work there. It's about creating a community, because that's the goal of the government. For a regular house, it's generally straightforward and there's not so many conditions like this. This can be done as a standard process through a real estate company. The market demand. For Akiya, there's actually a low market demand domestically. This would be for unique buyers looking to renovate property for project homes, people that are interested in traditional architecture. On the contrary, new properties are what people want. They want to be comfortable, they want the latest technologies, they want the best safety, for example, earthquake standards. They're desirable for a number of reasons. Maintenance needs. Akiya are likely to require structural or cosmetic work due to neglect or abandonment. There could be potential significant renovations required. For a new property, it's expected that there's almost nothing to do when you move in. The amenities. Older property in Japan come with certain conditions. For example, a drop pit toilet. If you're buying a kominka, your toilet situation may not be the most fun situation that you want to be in. Some houses don't have a shower or a bathroom because they used local community onsen or hot springs, or sento, the local bathhouse, when new houses are typically equipped with modern amenities. Legal and tax considerations. For some Akiya, there may be unclear ownership or inheritance issues. This might require special legal handling, where as a new house, a new property, it's most likely very straightforward and follows the standard process. Community impact. By purchasing, renovating, and living in an Akiya, you can substantially improve and revitalize a community that has a declining population. This is great for preservation of a town and a community. Why people are buying Akiya. It's an investment potential. Many buyers see Akiya as a way to enter the Japanese real estate in an affordable way, even if it's just for the land. Akiya offers a low-cost alternative investment. DIY and renovation opportunities. Akiya properties often appeal to a DIY enthusiast looking to take part in a project of restoring a traditional Japanese house. It's fun to experience Japanese architecture, to feel the tatami, have the sliding doors, the wooden aspects of the house. It's all fun. Tourism and rental income. Some buyers are turning Akiya property into vacation rentals, especially for tourists, offering unique experiences for visitors and people who are seeking traditional Japanese stays. The Minpaku vacation rental opportunities are growing, particularly in scenic areas in Japan. It offers buyers a potential income source while preserving traditional houses in Japan. What are some of the key considerations to buying an Akiya? What is the budget that you have for renovations? Because that hole could be deep. Consider the cost of repairs. Some Akiya need substantial work. Some need to be demolished to be lived in, but others can be really good too. But do you understand what the costs are that are required to do that work? Another important consideration, how well do you know DIY? How well do you understand what is available in the DIY stores in Japan? And if they don't have what you need, do you understand what to do? What's an alternative? How about the construction method in Japan? Are you open to taking your time to learn how that works, because it might be quite different to construction methodologies where you're from. It's not only a cost investment, but it's very much a time investment. How well do you speak Japanese that you can communicate with any of the legal requirements, setting up the Wi-Fi, calling a phone company? Is this something you're able to do, or can you afford to pay someone else to do this? These are additional costs. It can cost extra money to have someone else set up your life if you can't speak in Japanese or read Japanese. You have to account for these additional costs. Someone will charge you money to do these services. What are the local property taxes? They're usually pretty cheap, but just understanding that paints the full picture. Another important point is understanding any conditions the property might have. For example, if the house is 150 years old, maybe the road that is now there now wasn't there previously. I've seen conditions where that property has to be built somewhere else. It can't be put back where it is. Something needs to change. That land is not yours anymore. Or maybe your driveway doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the person next door and you have to pay them rent. So there's a lot of these conditions you really have to pay attention to. It's not as straightforward as buying a new house. You can easily flip Akiya for profit. The myth is that people think that it's cheap to renovate your property in Japan, and it's actually quite expensive for the building industry in Japan. Money does add up. If you are not skilled in DIY, if you're not almost professional in DIY, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to have to pay someone else to do the work. And I can tell you now that if you're getting Japanese companies and businesses to help with your work, it's not cheap. I've also heard that it can cost more if you do not speak Japanese. If you're international, you come to Japan and you want to renovate your property, this is something that might take more time. If companies or businesses are charging more money because it takes another 30%, 40% in time with the client, should the cost not be an extra 30 or 40% because it's costing them time, and time is money? What are your thoughts? Put it in the comments. Another myth is that you can pick up this property for free. You don't have to pay anything for it because it's free. The reality is you'll be paying at least 1 million yen or 7,000 US dollars minimum in fees to own that property. And if you need to get a translator to get help with legal advice in Japan with other complexities that you're unaware of, if you don't speak any Japanese, you're definitely going to be paying more. There is no free. Buying Akiya is easy and hassle-free. It is not always easy and hassle-free. There is a lot to talk about ownership. There are conditions. There is usually a government person that you speak to, plus a real estate agent, and sometimes the owner is also involved. It's not as straightforward as just buying a regular house. It takes time, effort, and it will cost you extra money in different areas, especially if you don't speak or understand Japanese. It's just international people trying to buy Akiya in Japan. This is also not true. You can find local people here also wanting to buy another property. They might want a vacation home. They might want a project so when they can leave Tokyo and come into the mountains on the weekend and enjoy gardening at this cheap house that they have. Enjoy fixing something up and enjoying some DIY. These properties are haunted. Someone has died here. Some crazy ghost lives here. Monsters live there. This is a completely different classification on a property. It's not so exciting, unfortunately. This type of property is called Jiko Buken. And there are ways to find information about this as stigmatized property. And it's actually landlord obligations or legal obligations to let people know that this property has had some kind of death involved in that. And that's something you can ask when you buy a house in Japan. This is a completely different topic in a different video. So Akiya doesn't really relate to this topic. This house is such a waste. It's not being used. Actually, some of these houses are being used. Some people use this for storage. I've seen communities in Japan that use these houses that are empty to store their community things in there. Multiple people will use these, or the original owner, the actual owner, will just use that space for storage. But there are times where it's being used for some purpose within the community or by the owner. We explored what an Akiya actually is, from its basic definition to what makes it stand apart from a regular property. We've busted some of these myths along the way, and we've talked about the potentials and some of the differences. The key takeaway that I'd like to point out in this video is that, like I mentioned earlier, the point of Akiya, the point of Akiya banks, from the government's perspective, is a way to revitalize a community for a declining population, an area with a declining population, to try to grow again, for people to be here and to contribute. Whether you're after an affordable property in Japan, want a unique project with renovation potential, or simply love the idea of helping Japan revitalize these communities, Akiya offers some interesting opportunities. But remember that buying Akiya comes with unique challenges and responsibilities, from maintenance and legalities to understanding community needs. It's more than just a property. Akiya lets you connect with Japan's culture, history, and local communities in a unique way. If the idea of taking on a unique project with a cultural twist sounds appealing, Akiya might just be a perfect fit. Let me know in the comments, would you consider buying an Akiya property? If so, what are you most interested in? A traditional fixer-upper, a nearly new suburban home, or maybe an off-the-grid retreat? What would be the reason behind wanting this Akiya in Japan? Thanks for watching, subscribing, and liking. Don't forget to join the discussion in the comments. See you on the next video. Happy travels!